me and you had this really dope conversation. And so I'm gonna just ask you to pick it up because you said you've been thinking more about it. So tell me what you were thinking.
Yeah, so you had called it and talked to me about like the concept of heaven and like even thinking about it on a deeper level. And even like how you had talked about when Jesus was on earth and he was telling people the kingdom of heaven is here. Or just talking about that and just like not even thinking about the actual location, geographical place, physical place of heaven, but even deeper than that, something that's bigger than that. Because I think
you put
like
some great wording around that. You said the culture of heaven.
Right, and even like that, as I start thinking about it, it's not just the culture of heaven, because I think it's the culture, but like we talk about social mores that are here in our world, like what's acceptable, what are the things that we want other people to do, and so like when Jesus is saying like the kingdom of heaven is here, he was saying the authority is here. And I think where that's the embodiment of Jesus Christ, he was saying the authority or the power or in the Greek word for power in this is exousia, which means authority, liberty, permission to do as one pleases. And he's saying the authority is here.
The authority of heaven.
And also the social mores, the culture. I am the tone setter of heaven because I am, right? And I think that's one of the things where people were missing it because they were keep hearing a location, but not understanding what that location brought. And so I think for me, when I was thinking about even after we got off the phone, is like, what was Jesus actually saying I'm bringing? And who was he telling he was bringing? Because a lot of times he was talking to the people who didn't know better or the church folk.
He's talking to both,
and trying to enlighten them and bring up that higher level of knowledge that they were having. And so like he was saying, like, I'm showing you these things. Follow me, and I'm gonna show you these things, and I'm gonna give you a piece of heaven so that you can want it. And like he's not saying, here, I'm gonna give you a little solid piece of gold from heaven.
Saying, no, that's not what he's saying.
But he's saying, I'm giving you a peace that you will have in heaven. I'm giving you joy that you will have in heaven, unlimited.
I love what you just did there because it makes what Jesus did to me so much cooler, right? You say he comes on the scene and he's like, hey, let me first be clear. I have the authority to bring it here. Right. I am it. Like, I know what it is. Right. And then he says, then you start to look at all of the things he said, and he describes it in really beautiful ways. He's like, all right, first, I have the authority to bring it here. Now that you know that, the kingdom of heaven is like this, right? And then he begins to kind of lay out what it's like, and what he lays out are things, truths about peace, and truths about love, and truths about beauty, and truths about joy, and those kinds of things. And then he says, that's what I love. He says, oh, and it's here. The kingdom of heaven is here, right? I have the authority to bring it. It is now here. You can start experiencing it. But I love that you said mores. And how did you describe them again? You like
what is accepted? What is like, what are kind of like the norms? What's the rhythm of a society or a culture or things of that nature?
And I love that idea because I think that brings the in it, not of it meaning a lot clearer, right? I hear a lot of people when they always talking about we're supposed to be in the world and not of it, and that I don't know if they tend to think that means don't do this, don't do that, but it actually means what you're saying, It's like saying, hey, understand, we're not saying that you can't have this other kingdom, but we're saying this is the kingdom of heaven. This is what is acceptable. This is how we behave. This is what we value, right? This is what we care about.
And it's just, and when Jesus is saying it, to me, it seems like he's saying like, this is what's in heaven, and I can show you these things. It's present. However, there is a veil.
There is a veil.
Or there is a filter that's because we're on earth, because there is sin, because of the fallen nature of everything. However, even through that veil, even through the filter, you still can see the beauty of some of these things. And hopefully this just like I go to Costco a lot.
I like Costco. They know me by name down there.
Unfortunately, they know everything about me because I spend way too much money there. But my kids love going there. You know why they like going there?
I get the snacks, man.
The snacks.
You love the snacks, bro.
But see, that's the part of what like Jesus was saying, like, hey, take this sample. Take this sample. It's good, ain't it?
It is good.
Yeah, let's good. Here's a whole
right here.
But I'm gonna give you a sample of it, and that's kind of what Jesus was saying. Like, the kingdom of heaven is here, and although we are, we are here on this earth and it's restricted a little bit, you're going to have that good snack that you had, you're going to have it unlimited there.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that like kind of course, that's a
I think
illustration.
I think it's a beautiful illustration, right? Because it does do this thing that I think that we do, that I don't like that we do, that Jesus seems to be countering, right? What this idea is, when we think about heaven, the one thing we think about, right? If you talk to almost anybody, the one thing they know about heaven is not like here.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like here.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but when you do that, right, then what you tend to do then is you start being like, oh, well, if it's not like here, then I just got to make it through this place to get to the next place. But Jesus comes on the scene. He said, oh, no. The kingdom of heaven is here now, right? Begin to experience the samples of it now, and then you will be able to mature. One day you will have your own Costco card, Wes. Right? like, you know what I mean? Like one day, right now you can't buy, right? If I take my kids in Costco, right? They can't check out, right? They can't do any of that kind of stuff because there is a limit between that. But they can experience, they can walk down the aisles, they can eat the food, they can smile at the people, they can experience what the place is like, even though they can't engage in it fully.
And it's funny because you're saying that, like, and I think people are like limited to, again, on their knowledge of what they think of heaven. But even if you see some of the first things that Jesus was saying in Matthew, in the Lord's Prayer, let your will be done on earth as in heaven. Meaning like saying like, hey, like we're on earth, but I want to introduce heaven on earth so people can see it and then only not just desire it, but also be able to share it with other people. Yeah. And that's why I want. And so then if I'm sharing it more and more and more, then more people will be able to see it and want to have more of heaven. But the only way you actually get heaven is if you like accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Yeah, if you follow Jesus. And that makes sense to me, right? And I think that's why I really love what you did when we had our conversation, is you made that distinction between the place of heaven and the culture of heaven, right? And I think because what happens is whenever you start telling people, hey, we're trying to bring heaven to earth, right? Immediately what people think you're trying to do is something else. You know, I don't know what they think that is, but usually people feel like you've gotten off track or something like that. And I'm saying, no. When I say bringing heaven to earth, right, on earth as it is in heaven, the kingdom of heaven is here, all of those things, what I'm saying as a follower of Jesus and what you're saying as a follower of Jesus is, hey, we bring the culture of heaven here, right? And in fact, that's how we can even know if anybody else is a believer, right? Is because they have the same culture of heaven that we have, right? And so we're always, but when we talk about heaven, even when we talk about it, right, we rarely hear people talk about the beauty, right, or joy, or peace, or serenity, or all the things that we know we will experience in heaven. What we talk about is streets of gold, like we're gonna hock this mug and take it to the pawn shop or something. And I'm like, no, it's Jesus is trying to teach us that the culture of heaven is the reason the place of heaven is beautiful, right? Yeah, if you don't have the culture, then you can have the place. We've all been to, unfortunately, I've been to beautiful churches where the culture
is trash.
right, that's what I'm saying. Like, and so what happens is if we start to focus, and I think in my mind, I think a lot of that is just because of the way that we perceive the world, right? But the thing I love about your culture example, and even what you just shared, is in organizational leadership. You know, my PhD is in organizational leadership. In organizational leadership, how they even define culture is, hey, these are the thoughts, behaviors, ideas, things that we have found that work well enough to be passed on to the next group of people, right? To be taught as the way you should behave. And that's what you're saying for us as followers of the kingdom, is like, hey, if you are following the kingdom, truly, right? If you are truly finding it, you have found, right? Marcus, Wes have found that this works so good that I want to tell other people, right? And I think, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think a lot of our evangelism, or our sharing of the gospel so much now feels like it's out of some sort of obligation or command instead of the actual desire for people to experience what the culture of heaven is like, man. Because I could tell you, bro, let me be clear, I don't have a whole bunch of money. Let me tell everybody, I don't got a whole bunch of money. I ain't got no money.
He lying.
My kids eat all my money. Right. That's what they do. Right. Yeah, I know you know. I know you know. Them teenage kids. So I don't have a whole bunch, but what I will say is I actually would stack my life and like what I experience in terms of how I feel and how I experience life, I would stack it next to anybody on the planet, man. Like somebody asked me the other day, they said, Wes, what would your dream life look like? And I said, yo, man, honestly, I'm really close to it.
Yeah.
I'm really, really close to it, right? Now, I might love to do some travel more, right? But I'm really, really close to it. And it's not because, and so when I want to tell other people about Jesus, I'm not telling them because I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to, right? Which I am supposed to, right? But I am quite literally like, dude, I actually think Jesus is the coolest dude in the world. If you listen to some of the stuff he promised and what he said we get to experience here, right? If we know that joy, and I'm gonna stop talking because I'm talking too much, but if we know that joy and external circumstances aren't linked, we found that in research, and we know you can have one without the other, right? Then I go,
or in spite of the other.
In spite of the other, right? Then I go, all right, then how do I get the other one? And then I go, and Jesus was like, oh, bro, I give you joy. Bro, I give you peace. Bro, you'll have a comforter, right? You'll love one another. And I go, wait, if I break down what he just said, I'm gonna have joy, regardless of what happened.
No conditional statement at that.
None.
Yeah.
Right, you know what I mean? And I was like, and then he says, I'm gonna have great relationships, right? How would you know? Because of the way we love one another.
That's right.
Like you're gonna have great relationships. So I'm like, oh, if I told anybody, hey man, you're about to have a life full of joy, peace, great relationships, comfort when you need it, blessed it, right? I'm like, yo, wouldn't you want that?
Yeah.
That's what, and I'm like, oh, that's why I tell you about Jesus, because that's what he gives.
And that's what kind of with Paul, I love when Paul talks about how he's compelled by the gospel. And I think even that where it's like, you can say you're obligated because of the gospel, but he's compelled.
Compelled, I like that.
And I like that because it's saying like, if someone's done something for you so much, like you almost feel obligated, but then it's just like, bro, like, I can do the same for somebody else and somebody did for me, and I know how that made me feel.
Yeah,
and I can have somebody else to feel it. I'm compelled to do that.
Well, that's what I love. I love that obligation, like you said, feels like you're fighting yourself.
Right.
But compelled feels like you want to.
Yeah, you're not fighting yourself. You're actually motivating yourself.
Yeah.
You're pushing yourself. You're driving yourself to do something. And I think that's where a lot of times where if you really experience the peace of God, the joy that you have, all these things that God has promised us, if you really truly experience, it's almost like there's no way I can't. Like my mama used to say all the time, like my mama, down south girl from Vivian, Louisiana.
Okay.
And she talk about all the time, like I'm like a broken refrigerator, I can't hold nothing. You know what I'm saying? So when she when she testifies about something, about that joy, it's not that she's bragging, it's that I want you to share in my joy.
Yeah.
And also I want you to share in my God who provided that joy. And I think that's even where God was even saying, Jesus was saying like that, I want you to come into my joy, come into my peace, abide in me, because then if you abide in me, all these things will be given to you unlimited. Even on this earth, when you go through all this crap, all this pain, all this struggle, all this stuff, none of that will be able to touch any of this.
Yeah.
And even when you get out of all this, when we get to heaven,
oh,
we're going to have it even better. Like,
even
it's just
better,
like,
yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where like, I think it should compel us to just not say, hey, believe in Jesus for fire insurance.
Yeah, I don't.
But it's just like, what if we can actually not just be safe from hell, but what if we can actually go somewhere where we can have the greatest experience of joy, peace, love, all the things that God's promising us? What if we can do that where it's unlimited, there's no time limit on it, there's no like capacity limit of it. Like you get to experience that and you be a part of it as well. It's like it kind of compels you to do it.
And it actually makes me think of how I've been thinking of eternity, right? I've been thinking of eternity, and I think a lot of times we think of eternity as endless moments never ending, right? But what if what if eternity was more like one never-ending moment of the best things that God promised us, right? You know what I mean? Like, and when you start to think about how kind of Jesus describes the kingdom of heaven, right? And then he kind of seems to say, hey, you do this culture, and then when you get to the next place, it never ends.
It never
right?
ends, yeah.
And so instead of us thinking moment by moment it happens, what if it's just like, one never-ending moment of the, right? I've had experiences where I've sat with family, or one time I was joking with two of my boys, you know them both, Steve Seals and Roy the Narrator. And we was joking one day, talking about like what inventions Jesus came up with when he was on earth. We was just making up stuff.
Right.
We like, Jesus is the first person to ever make a table, right?
That's right.
Just joking, right? And and I promise, I thought to myself in that moment, we laughed so hard, dude. It was probably the best laugh I've ever had in my life. And I thought, man, I wish I could stay in this moment forever, right?
Right.
And then I listened to how Jesus describes what's to come. And it feels like that moment forever, right? And that's why I've been trying to change the core analogy of how we think of heaven, right? I think we think of heaven, I keep saying this, we think of heaven as not like here. And so all we want to do is get out of here. But what if we thought of heaven as just like here, but only the best parts
of here?
Yeah, only the best parts of here that never ended.
And even I would say the best parts of here without the worst parts of here.
Yes.
Because you can have the best parts of here. The best parts of here is here right now.
They are here, yeah.
But we also, it's not
mix,
absence of the worst parts of here as well. So you still get the life of a baby. That's great. But you still get the tragic death of someone else. So, but you get the life of this joy that comes from this life without the tragedy of the death. Because they say there's no more death, no more sickness, no more pain.
Tears,
So all those things that kind of frame the joy, or just like have a bookend the joy, that won't be there anymore. And so it's just like, it's just going to keep spilling over in itself. And just like, no, I didn't think that I can ever feel this type of joy continuously until you get to heaven. Of course, you'll be able to have that.
And that's what I guess then I ask, so then if we push it backwards, right? And we push it backwards and we say, all right, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is here. What would it feel like for us here on earth to have as close to that experience as possible, right? As close to that experience as possible. What would it look like? I'd really am interested to know.
That's a good question. I think it'll take. I think individually we can feel it or we can experience it, but even how we spread it so other people can be a part of it, that may be the most difficult part, because you yourself have to be able to overcome those things that will kind of stifle the joy, the peace, and all those things. And you can, but then how do you help someone else be able to do that? And I guess it is just by like saying like, hey, this is what God is offering you. And then for them to have that acceptance of it, then you guys can experience together. And I think that's what Jesus was always telling them, like, you can experience my joy. You can experience this, and inviting them in. And I love how he doesn't force them in. He invites them in.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing that we're going to have to deal with. We can only invite them in.
And I think we can if we believe it, right? That's the part, right? If we really believe it. And I think we can, right? Like, and I'm not saying I'm there. Let me be clear, I am not. But I will tell you, and I think I told you this story, man, I have been experiencing a new level of peace and joy in Jesus that I've never had before. And so I got sick probably a few weeks ago, man, and I thought I was gonna die.
Right.
I think I told you this part.
Yeah.
And I was getting scared. I was like, man, I'm gonna die. And then I said to myself, wait, if I'm gonna die, Jesus would want me to have, he promised me peace, right? And so I quite literally folded my legs up, crisscross applesauce, right, at the bottom of the bed, right? And just sat there and waited for whatever was gonna happen. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, right? But I'm just gonna sit here and be in peace while it happens, right? Because that's what was promised to me, right? Now, I go, yeah, I have not figured out how to do that all the time.
Right.
But I feel like I'm getting closer, right? And then I'm like, oh, I'd love to tell you guys about this too, right? Like, I'd love for you guys to know, like, hey, you can get to a point where death doesn't necessarily. I said to my mother the other day, I said it out loud, and then I had to say, Ma, that seemed like a crazy thought I was having, but she was telling me about something on the news, and she was like, this is terrible, whatever, and I was like, yeah, and I said, you know, Ma, I don't really feel fear anymore. And she was like, what? And I said, what? Because I said it out loud. But the truth is, I don't, right? I can't tell you the last time I felt fear. Right. Now, I'm not saying I am fearless, right? Or I don't want nobody to run up and be like, you fear now? Like, I'm not doing that. But I am saying, like, I have gotten to the point where I kind of say this, and this is where I think this is what the kingdom of heaven feels like for me and what I'd like for other people to experience, right? The kingdom of heaven feels like this for me. I plan and take care of as much as I can. But if I can't, that belongs to God. And he really likes me. Right? He really likes me, right? Because me and God, we get along really well, like, because I am trying to be like Jesus in every way possible. Right? So we get along really well. So I go, all right, well, if the world is coming to an end, right? I go, well, here's what I would plan. I'm gonna make sure this food but after that, somebody's like, but what happens if a nuclear bomb hits next door? I'm like, dude, I couldn't plan for that. I couldn't plan for that. That belongs to God. He likes me. If that happens, that's because he needed it to happen for some reason, right? He needed it. And so I feel like, I don't really have to be afraid in the same way anymore. And I'm like, I'd love to be able to bring this. I feel compelled almost to tell people, like, yo, this is the kind of peace you can have. This is the kind of comfort you can have, right? And it's not, right? I'm not saying I've arrived, but I do think, I'm like, man, I'm trying to experience that kingdom here. This is what it feels like for me.
So you said a lot of things that I would kind of want to respond to.
All right, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to say a couple of things real quick. Okay. Like, you talk about like how, like, you feel like, you're not fearless, but you don't have that feeling of fear. I'm kind of nerd out a little bit. I used to have a minor in math.
Okay. All right.
Had a minor in math. Anyway, life's journey.
I don't know why you was doing that.
I love
the math. Right.
But there's a thing in math called an asymptote. If you have the XY axis grid, it's where the asymptote, if this is the line, the line, asymptote comes up and gets as close as it possibly can without touching it. And it'll, as much as it rises,
as close as
it gets closer and closer, but it never touches it.
Okay.
And I think that's what a lot of times for us, when we get a chance to experience God here on earth, we can keep moving as close as we possibly can to it on this earth. And it'll feel like we're there, but we're not really there yet. But when we cross over to the other side, we crossing that line. Ain't no more not touching it. We're getting there. And I think that's a lot of times where it is one of those things where it's almost where you experience it as it's going up. You're like, man, I want more of that. I want more of that. And you just keep getting to the point where it's like, I want more of that. And then you get that, like, you get to the point where you're getting close to it, but you never cross it. You're like, but man, I feel that peace there. I feel it. And I know that it's going to be eventually there always. I'm going to experience an unadulterated version of this when I get to heaven. And so that's one of the things I want to respond to. Is like, and I think that's where it is for you. You've had that journey where, okay, you were maybe fearful a little bit, but now that you've kind of got close to whatever, now you know what, I've experienced this and God got me.
He does.
And so his peace has me. His joy has me. His love has me. It endures forever. I can testify to that. And so, I'm not there yet, but I'm telling you, man, I'm as close as I possibly can to this. And God's like, no, you're not. I'm gonna give you a little more.
I got you more.
And that's the beauty of God, where God is saying, like, I will give you exceedingly abundantly above what you ask or think. And it's just like, as much as you continue to imagine, because we can only do that here on earth. And then we can have a full realization when we get there. And so that's where, like, for me, I was like, it sounds so much like that to me. So that's the nerd part of me. I'm sorry.
I thought that was beautiful. In fact, I'm stealing that exact analogy,
and
bro.
You're going to take back your, you can apologize about me and my math nerds.
You're right. I do apologize. My bad, bro.
But no,
it's just schooling, bro.
But I think a part of that for people, like, to like share that with other people, a lot of times they have yet to get on that upward trajectory. And so since they're still here, and there is, I'm just going to keep your example, there is a very present, fear is very present in their life. They don't understand what you're going through right here. And so a lot of times when we don't understand what we don't understand, we fear. And that compounds the fear that they already have. So they're like, You're talking about heaven, bro, or you talking about this joy that you have on earth, but I saw you sick. I saw you hurting. I saw you in pain. How did you get through all that? And like, they think that I don't have the power to do what you're doing because Wes, you're Dr. West.
No,
that's the reason why you did that. Because you can have your daughter buy Jordans.
Yeah.
I'm not out there. They started saying all these things that actually don't even play into why you're here.
Don't have anything to do with it.
But they will put that there and it'll block them from getting there. So then your job, if you want to share heaven with them and say, actually it has nothing to do with that.
Nothing to do with that.
And back to that whole heaven aspect of it, like we talk about those tangible things of heaven. God was saying the kingdom of heaven is here, those intangible things that will help you be able to go up on that upward trajectory, to keep pressing on. So then that you can share with people. And then that's when you can start spreading that. So to go back to your question about like, how can we have more that here? It is that where you have to say, okay, you're here, but I need you to get up this way. But only way you can do that is if I can take these things that are in your way, that's blocking you from getting upwards, help you to see that these are not even a reality. If you want to see like true joy, true peace, true love of Christ, all these things that I'm experiencing more and more every day, then to your point also that these things are not connected to one another. Once you start seeing that,
once you start seeing that part.
And you understand that,
you're good. And that's where I just go, oh, if we could recognize, that's what I think happened is I think we don't even recognize that the two things aren't connected. Right. We don't even know how to disconnect them.
I don't mean to cut you off real quick.
No,
so I had a conversation with my son. Please. I have a 15-year-old son, and he got a little trouble. And like I told him, like
they all do, the teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, little was great.
Yeah, little trouble. Yeah.
And so I had to have it was great for me because I had a conversation with him about the difference between causation and correlation. And I was just telling him like there is something that is a correlation, meaning like this happened, and they might not be the same thing, but it seems like every time this happens. That doesn't mean that's a causation. That's a correlation.
That's a correlation.
Because you can say this happened and this didn't happen and boom, that's it.
Yeah.
Like the causation of a seed to grow is that it has to have fertilization, it has to have water, it has all these things. Those are causation. But the correlation of like other things that can be variables that can be taken away from it, those are correlations. So what I'm saying, when you talk about the joy and the things that are tied together, a lot of people see that, money and happiness, these are causations.
Correlated,
but they're not. That's a correlation in that person's life.
Yeah.
But also, if you go back and talk to someone like who came from the dirt and now they have money, they would tell you a lot of times I was happier when I didn't have.
J. Cole says it over song after song.
And so therefore there's not a causation of having these things that cause these things.
Yeah.
And so and that's where I think for us, we have to understand like, yes, you can have these things without having them.
Yeah.
And then once they kind of start realizing that, then they can kind of break out of that and start that upward trajectory.
Yeah. And then I hope they ask the next logical question, right, is how, right? Because then I go, well, let me tell you about this guy, right? Who to me, all right, I keep saying this statement and I feel like it should blow everybody's mind every time I say it, right? But all right, I'll phrase it this way. If you were to ask most people, you would say, hey, I want you to give me an example. In fact, I would argue almost all people. I want you to give me an example of a good person. I think Jesus has a good shot at their answer, right? For everybody. And so I go, wait, if everybody on the planet thinks that Jesus is a good person, then by definition, he's the best person, right? And so then I say, well, if he's the best person, right? The best human being, by definition, right, is the definition of goodness. Right? And then I would say, well, then the definition of goodness is God, right? So the very fact that no one seems to have a problem with Jesus, in my mind, should blow everybody's mind, right? That is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I think I'm a good person, but me and my brother, we've clashed, right? I have critics. Martin Luther King has critics. Mother Teresa has critics.
Mother Teresa.
You know what I'm saying? Mother Teresa has critics. Jesus. Now, Christians have a bunch of critics, Christianity, theology, all of that. But when you ask most people, what did Jesus say or do that you have a problem with? They go, Oh, nothing. Then I go, all right, then if that's the case, and you're trying to figure out how do you get to these things, how do you get to these things that if they're not linked to the external circumstances, the money, the whatever it is, how do you get to them? I say, let's ask the best person.
Right.
Let's ask the best person. And the best person says some of the dopest stuff around this stuff I've ever heard. Yeah. Like you said, he when he invites us into his joy, in John 14, he quite literally says, hey, if you do this, my joy will be in you. And when my joy hits your joy is full.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, man, that's the coldest thing I've ever heard.
Right.
He's not saying you don't have joy. He's saying, hey, listen, when my joy though hits yours, bro, you're gonna be full.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, I wanna figure out how to make that happen, right? That's the kind of thing that I go, oh man, I hope they ask the next logical question. If the two aren't linked, how do I start to access this one, even if I don't have that one? And I go, oh, even if you don't have the physical circumstances stuff, this is how Jesus says you can access the kingdom. It's like this.
Yeah.
And it's like that, right? And he tells us parables and he does those things, right? And I think
so you give them a simple answer, but it's not an easy answer.
Right, simple but not easy. Hey,
because Jesus is the answer.
Yeah, he is the answer, bro.
But what I found though is that it's not an easy answer.
It's not an easy answer, no.
Because a lot of people like Jesus as Savior, like, give me that. Lord. So you mean I gotta submit?
Yeah.
That means those things that I'm inclined to do, that I know is against your word.
Well, but I think it goes back to what you were saying. I think if you really find Jesus, if you really find him, right, it's more compelled than submit, right? Like I love to do what Jesus told me to do. If I get an opportunity, I'd be like, dude, I get to geek out. I geek out about it.
That's West right now, though.
Right, that's West right now. True.
And so that's where I'm saying, like, okay, so now you go and meet someone who is not a believer, and now they have to start becoming a believer. I mean, they become a believer, but they have to learn how to submit to their lives to him. And I think that's where a lot of times we as Christians have to understand that there is a process. People make a decision, but also there's a process.
Well, what I wonder is, that's what I'm saying. I'm wondering, is there something along the process or the way we've been doing it that causes that to happen, right? Because here's what I think, right? I've been asking this question, and I'm gonna ask it, and I think I'm gonna answer it, and you can tell me what you think, right?
Gotcha.
So, can you believe in Jesus wrongly? And I say, yes, but I think the problem fixes itself. And what I mean is, like if somebody came to me and they said, I don't believe Jesus ever existed, but I think that he was a good moral teacher, I go, okay, right? Because I say, then you think that the things Jesus taught are ways people should behave. And they go, yeah. I say, okay, so eventually you'll get to the point where you think you try to get other people to behave that way. And they'll go, yeah. And I said, and then eventually you'll try to act like Jesus is in as many ways as possible. And they'll go, yeah. And I go, oh, well, then the problem fixes itself, right? If you get to the point where you're trying to be like Jesus in as many ways as possible, you're voluntarily doing it, right? And that's what I think, for me, believing in Jesus is a voluntary following. And I say, if you really believe, if you really follow him, then yeah, you may have to submit, but you'll feel compelled to submit, right? So it's almost like you'll have joy from, and I think, in my mind, I actually think that starts from the very beginning, right? I've been telling a lot of new Christians, I tell them, hey, here's what you need to know, is the moment you decided to start following Jesus, you do it just as good as the rest of us. Now, the rest of us might be doing it different, right? But we're not doing it better, right? Like I've been around it a long enough time. I could quote some scripture. I've trusted guys who have shown itself. So I have an easier time trusting them in hard times and things like that. But let's be clear. I've got my own things I'm working on, right? I got trust issues. I got all kinds of stuff I'm working on. So I'm trying to follow Jesus the way you are, the exact same way you are, whoever you are, new believer, old believer, right? Now I might be doing it different, right? But I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it better, right? And that's because both of us want to be like Jesus.
Right.
And I think that's, for me, is the question that I've been wrestling with around this is when we say believe in Jesus, do we mean believe or do we mean proclaim? And that's what I think has happened, is I think we've begun to say proclaim, but I think those of us who really believe, right? I really believe, genuinely believe, like if somebody tries Jesus, their life will be better, right? Now, immediately when I say that, Christians immediately want to go, yeah, but you don't want them to think everything's gonna be good. And I'm like, I know, right, that part. But here's what I've also found true. If you remember it, you walked with the Lord a long time. But in the beginning, Jesus just does do a lot of stuff to make your life better, right? Like I had a woman I was talking to at the chicken shack, and she said to me, she was like, man, I just started following Jesus. And the other day I was praying and I was just like, man, I'd love some this. She's like, and then this dude just walks by and he has it, right? And in her mind, she knew that was God doing that for her. And I started going back like, oh yeah, I remember when I first got saved. He does a bunch of that in the beginning, right? He does do a bunch of that in the beginning, right? Now, he doesn't make everything better, but he makes it very clear that he's caring for you in the beginning, right? And so that's where I'm like, I think if we really believe, that's the question that I've begun to ask, is do we really believe or do we proclaim, right? And because if you really believe, you do different stuff, right? Like I rarely ever feel like I have to protect God anymore, if that makes sense, right? Like, so if people were like, man, you can't wear hats in church, I'll be like, yeah, I don't care, right? Like, I don't even think you should care, right? Do you think Jesus will change their life or not, right? Because if he doesn't want them to wear hats,
he'll change their life.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If they really believe in him, right? But you gotta it's if you really believe, and that's the part I wonder. And that's where I think even getting to this culture of heaven that you talk about and things, I think it has to be with genuine belief. It can't be with proclamation.
Yeah, well, I would say this. It's kind of make that thought a little more complete.
Okay.
I think even if you look at Romans where it says, if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, which means there's a proclamation and also there's action. And so there,
it is proclamation and action.
You can't divorce the two.
Yeah.
I think, and that's where like we have to have that proclamation that Jesus is Lord or Jesus is King or I believe in Jesus. And I think a lot of people proclaim them.
Yeah. But don't do the
work.
Don't do the belief.
Don't do the belief. But here's the funny thing. I think a lot of people do the belief, but don't proclaim. Because you get a lot of behavior modification that looks like what Jesus says without confessing Jesus as Lord as well. And so I think both of them can be damaging to a person because Jesus is saying like you have to proclaim me and live as like me. The only way you can do that is with my Holy Spirit, but you have to get my Holy Spirit, you have to proclaim me. And you have to start allowing me to live and you have to line myself up. So there are people who proclaim, and I'm thinking of people and I'm not trying out my best.
I know, don't name nobody.
We don't want I'm talking about groups of people too. Like, but there are people who proclaim to be Christians, but they're cultural Christians, not actual Christians. And so they proclaim Jesus because it suits them. It's a means to an end for them. Not actually submitting to God himself. But they don't line their beliefs up with them. They don't line their actions up with them.
They don't believe.
Right.
That's how I describe. I would just describe that as not believing.
And then you're going to see moralists who say, I don't do these things. That if you look at Jesus said, yeah, don't do these things. But the reason why they don't do them is not because Jesus is Lord. It's because I'm a moralist or I feel ABC, whatever, because I don't do these things or I do these right things. And so I think it's one of those things where it can be dangerous because then people can start saying, well, I don't even need Jesus because I can just behave this certain way.
I'd love to have you back for this part because I actually think right now I prefer the moralist, right? Because the moralist, I can say to them, okay, what part of what Jesus said or did do you not like? And they'll go, oh, nothing. I have no problem with Jesus. And then I go, okay, then can I get you to try to act like him in every way? Right. And then I think after I've done that, I think Jesus handles the rest of that part. The other side, though, is they go, oh, I already have Jesus. And I go, Yeah, but do you really believe he can and does change your life?
Right.
Or is it cultural? And they usually will go, nah, I believe. And I go, but is it possible that we don't, right? Like, is it possible that you don't, right? Because they're harder because they feel like they have it already. And so that's why I'm like, I agree with you, right? I think proclamation and behavior come together, right? And I'd love to come back and talk more about how I've been thinking about that part. But I think right now I lean more towards
the person that's doing
right, because the proclaimer doesn't feel any need to change. Right. Whereas the moralist at least is saying, I'm trying to be moral. Right.
I think, and I can see where you say that, and I can almost agree with that, because like you look at Romans 2, when Paul was talking to the Israelites when they were living amongst the Gentiles who say they believe in Jesus, he said the name of God is being blasphemed because of you who are claiming Jesus, claiming this, but also acting like the Gentiles. So it's just one of those things where it's like, so to the point of like present day, for those who claim to be Christians, to those who be believers, to those who say that they walk and they follow after Christ, and yet they still live like everything else and everybody else, then you're doing damage to the name of Jesus Christ. You're doing damage to the name of God. And therefore, that's where, going all the way back to what we're talking about, like inviting people into this thing like that says, hey, you can have heaven on earth. People don't want that now because they see the people who are supposed to have access to heaven, access to the person who represents heaven, they treat me like crap. They act like this. And so it's like, why would I want that when the moralists who don't have Jesus
does something?
They do something, or they have more compassion than the person that's supposed to actually have compassion for me. At least based off of what I saw Jesus doing.
No, I know.
And so, I agree with what you're saying with that when it comes to a moralist versus the one who just proclaims and doesn't do.
Yeah. And that's where, and what's funny is, I feel like that's where the world is. I feel like more people are on the moralist. I feel like you actually gave a good description of Christian in the world right now. And I'd love to dive more into that. However, Mr. Nate did wave at me.
Okay.
So that means final thoughts. Final thought belongs to you, man. Break it down for us.
Yeah, man.
What's the takeaway?
I think just like even just introducing or having that conversation with me about like how we perceive heaven, how we think about heaven. And we can even expand into how we even think about our following Christ. How do we look at believing in Christ? Like, and I think a lot of people, we remember the time we said, I believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord, but thought that was even like how we would say, hey, just come to the altar, and that's it.
And that was it.
But understanding like God saying like there is more work to be done, not just by you, but by my Holy Spirit in you, however you have to let me in. And so Romans 12 always comes to my mind, just like, therefore, because of all these things he's done, I'm going to submit my life to you. And when I do that, I will be able to know your will because I will be transformed by the renewing of my mind. And I think once we start doing that, there's understand again that decision and the process. So we don't stop with just the decision. We keep going with the process, and trusting God. And then we will one day get to that heaven. So then we can have that unlimited joy, peace, love, and be able to share with other people. So
dope, bro.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, man.
Absolutely, man. Sure.
We're going to have to come back because I want to talk more. I got all kinds of subjects. We're going to have to do this.
I'm going to have to come back just to be able to like be a part of like what you're doing here with
at the USC.
You know, I have to. I love you.
So thanks, bro.